The Panthers will be taking on the Edmonton Oilers in the Stanley Cup Final again for a chance to repeat as champions. And how rare is this in NHL history to get a rematch?
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into this Friday, May 30th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on X and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. You can follow the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So, Panther fans, grateful to be back here once again on another edition of the show to discuss everything in the world of the Florida Panthers. And we have a rematch from the previous Stanley Cup Final. The Panthers won in 7 games against the Edmonton Oilers by final score of 2-1 for the franchise to get their first Stanley Cup. And then this year, it was unexpected, at least in my opinion, that the Panthers and the Oilers were meeting up again after the Edmonton Oilers defeated the Dallas Stars in 5 games. And the fact that for Edmonton going into the playoffs, there was lots of questions when it came to the roster, what was going on with their blue line. And then they got a lot of depth scoring, just like the Panthers in the Toronto series. The Oilers were down 0-2 against the LA Kings. A failed challenge by the Kings swung the momentum for Edmonton, and then they were able to win 4 straight, able to take care of the Golden Knights in 5, winning on the road in both the second round and the Western Conference Final against the Dallas Stars. So both these teams have been able to win on the road, and both teams have finished third in their division. Neither have had home ice advantage until in the case of Edmonton in the Stanley Cup Final. So it's another series where the Panthers will be starting off on the road. And let's talk about how rare this is in NHL history when it comes to a rematch of the Stanley Cup Final. We're going to go post-expansion to discuss really, in my opinion, where it really matters, where it's really the real start of the NHL, where they went from 6 teams to 12. In the first 2 years of expansion, the Montreal Canadiens and the St. Louis Blues faced off in back-to-back finals, with Montreal winning both of them. The Bruins and the Canadiens also faced off in back-to-back years in the late 70s, where Montreal won both of them. And then after the Islanders won 4 straight Stanley Cups in the early 80s, the Edmonton Oilers did get revenge on them, winning the very next year. And Wayne Gretzky even spoke about how when the Islanders won their 4th and final one, walked by the locker room, so many ice bags, just guys sitting down and drinking the beers, not really jumping up and down, and just goes to show what you need to do in order to win the greatest trophy in sports. And then the last one, post-expansion, is the late 2000s, where Marian Hossa was on one team in 2008 with the Pittsburgh Penguins, went to the opposition in the Pittsburgh Penguins. Other way around. He was with the Penguins in the first one, Detroit on the second one, and then Pittsburgh was able to get revenge on Detroit the second go round. And for the Edmonton Oilers and the Florida Panthers, Edmonton, a similar trend to last year, a poor start, but they did not have a coaching change this time around in their back pocket to use as a way to wake up the team in this. And like we spoke about multiple times with the Panthers, it was the case of just getting through the regular season, pacing yourself, getting healthy at the right time when it came to that. And at both of these teams in their respective playoff runs have had rematch of some sorts. LA, Vegas, Dallas. Edmonton has seen them multiple times in the playoffs over the last few years. LA specifically 4 times, a conference final rematch in the Dallas Stars, and then they faced Vegas in the second round this year, but in the conference final 2 years ago, where Vegas ended up winning that series in route to their Stanley Cup. Both teams had to deal with a fair share of losses. The Philip Brobergs and the Dylan Holloways when it came to the offer sheets. Warren Fogle got a bump when it came to signing as a free agent with the LA Kings. The Panthers lost Brandon Montour in OEL due to raises in free agency as well. So both teams have dealt with having to sign free agents in the offseason, taking less money in order to squeeze in to their cap situation, knowing that both teams are right there. Panthers obviously winning last year, Edmonton being 1 goal away from forcing overtime in a game 7. So missed me with that whole lack of state income tax when teams are trying to compete for the Stanley Cup, because I mean the tax situation in Canada, and Edmonton is back in the back-to-back finals. But as far as other pieces that Edmonton has brought in, Jeff Skinner is one in the mix who, after going since game 1 of the first round series against the LA Kings to game 5 of the Dallas series, he gets reinserted back in due to the injury to Zach Hyman, and he scores. So it's multiple guys getting in on the scoring. Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Evander Kane, after missing the whole entire regular season due to his injury, which we saw that injury sustained for him in the Stanley Cup Final, where he was just barely moving on the bench even for them. Even valuable trades that both teams have made. The San Jose Sharks got Jake Wallman for peanuts, and then they were able to get a first-round pick for Jake Wallman after he actually really showed out in Detroit. And Edmonton saw that he was getting wasted there. So not literally, but that it was a wasted talent in a team that's rebuilding. So it's like, let's bring him into a mix that is almost right there. And also doing this with a GM change, with Ken Holland retiring now, but Ken Holland is now the GM of the LA Kings, and then bringing in Stan Bowman into the mix. And I spoke about the injuries to Zach Hyman for the Edmonton Oilers. The Panthers are also dealing with their fair share. AJ Greer, Etulis Theranen. There was no Nico Mikla and Sam Reinhart for game 4 for the Panthers, and then they get reinserted into the lineup. Matthias Ekholm, his first game of the Stanley Cup playoffs were just last night when the Edmonton Oilers took on the Dallas Stars when they won. And once again, I think it's a real shock that the Oilers are back here, because for years we've been thinking that the Dallas Stars were going to be that team to knock on the door. And even during the Global Series, when I did my crossover with Joey Erickson of Locked On Stars, when the both teams filled with Finnish players, we spoke about it. Is like, hey, I even told him, see you in June, because this is what the expectation is. And then the trade for Mikko Rantanen. And honestly, people are talking about, oh, but Mikko Rantanen has such a great playoff run. You might see 9 goals, but no, he didn't. He really did not have a good playoff run. It's 3 hat tricks in 2 different periods in back-to-back games, and then 3 goals outside of that for him and the Dallas Stars. So it wasn't really as great of a playoff run as the stats might show for Mikko Rantanen. There's some context there. They didn't get the timely goaltending when they needed to. And also, what Pete DeBoer pulled in game 5, pulling Jake Ottinger, who the conversation going into this after Jake Ottinger defeated Connor Hellebuck in the previous round in 6 games was, okay, now Jake Ottinger has taken over as Team USA's starting goalie. So now it's the question of who's going to be the starter going into next year's Olympics now. So, and we've seen this before with Pete DeBoer with goaltenders. We saw it with Marc-Andre Fleury going out of favor with him. Now it's Jake Ottinger. It's the same thing, but it's like I said, the LA Kings in the first round, it's a matter of you should have killed them when they had a chance. Something that Evan Rodriguez spoke about the New York Rangers last year. But honestly, when it comes to the theater that we're going to see, all the stories about 3-0 of the Panthers blowing it, and the fact that the Oilers have their chance at redemption for them, it creates such a great storyline. And also when it comes to the Panthers, a chance is like, okay, you wanted us again? We're going to have to prove ourselves again that we are the standard of the NHL. And honestly, a lot of praise came from Rod Brindamore and the Carolina Hurricanes and company when it came to, hey, the Carolina Hurricanes play a similar style to the Panthers. It's just that they were able to get the better finishes. And the Panthers, the scoring by committee, you think of Sam Bennett, even from the blue line, 13 different goals from the blue line, and all 7 defensemen that have played in the Stanley Cup playoffs have gotten contributed in goals. 12 different forwards have gotten in on the scoring for the Panthers as well. So the Panthers are just have so much buy-in, and they're getting so much when it comes to the scoring depth. I will say that the Oilers only 4 power play goals against going into the Stanley Cup Final last year. Their penalty kill is a little weaker going into this statistically, but the fact that they were able to shut down the Dallas Stars with not sometimes not even giving up 5 shots against it when it came to the third period. They're learning to shut the games down, just like how the Florida Panthers have been similarly throughout the last few years of just trying to hold on to leads. And when it came to just not giving them anything, and the fact that both these teams are right in their primes. Connor McDavid, I mean, we're going on 10 years of him getting drafted. Alexander Barkov is in his late 20s, really in his prime right at this moment in time. And the fact that you're getting so many different pieces right there to just complement both rosters. I mean, this is just a Stanley Cup final that was just meant to be. It felt like destiny. And this is something that I was texting with Nick Zerars of Locked On Oilers. It was meant to be for these two to meet again. So we'll see what the other team is made of, to see if they can actually prove to the hockey world that, hey, they're out for blood. And for the Panthers, in their case, they are still motivated and energized. And that's where we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more of the Panthers and their sweet spot, and also the fact that the Panthers are not playing as many overtime games this time around, and also with better depth. We're going to discuss that and more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And the NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performance, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game winner or a breakout player, there's never a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. If you want to go to FanDuel to check in on your Conn Smythe odds, Sergei Bobrovsky is the second favorite in winning the Conn Smythe, right behind Connor McDavid. The Sam Bennett is also a plus 3,800 in order to win the Conn Smythe, so you can place that all on FanDuel. And are you new to FanDuel? It's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Segment 2 here on this Friday, May 30th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Friday. And the Panthers look to be in a sweet spot when it comes to making it this far. And how so are they in a little bit of a sweet spot? Nick Zerars, I mentioned him. He's the host of Locked On Oilers, and he's also the Thursday co-host of Locked On NHL. He spoke about it on yesterday's show, discussing how a Stanley Cup champion mostly plays around 22 playoff games in total, an average run. And it's crazy now that I think about it, when it comes to the Dallas Stars and just a long series against Colorado, 6 games against the Winnipeg Jets. They got tired out, and also they were dealing with a lot of injuries on their end. Miro Heiskanen, towards the end of the regular season, missed the entire first round. Jason Robertson didn't come alive until the last 3 games of the Western Conference Final. So it's just, and Matt Duchene was a complete ghost in the conference final. So you need short series every single time, at least for the most part, when it comes to getting to this point. It's crazy because the Florida Panthers in 2023, they had 2 short series, but the difference between those short series in 2023 compared to this year is the fact that they're not playing as many overtime games. And the Panthers, to this point, have only played in 1 in this entire postseason run. It's crazy. The last time the Panthers lost in overtime in the Stanley Cup playoffs was the infamous Trocheck was tripped game. Let's hope that it continues on in this postseason for the Panthers. Last year, they had 24 overtime games, and we weren't expecting it to go 7 games, obviously, after they went up 3-0, but they got the job done. And in 2023, they were run down. I mean, 7 overtime games in the 2023 run. And the fact that they even got an extra game out of it within the same game, going those 4 overtimes in Carolina in game 1. And the whole mileage, the Panthers have a lot of miles taxed on them due to the fact that they've went to 3 straight finals, I think is honestly quite a bit overblown. I mean, the schedule for the Panthers actually went really in their favor with the amount of back-to-backs. Sergei Bobrovsky didn't play as many regular season games this time around, although 8 players represented them in the 4 nations. The team that had the most Florida Panthers representatives in Finland didn't make the final game in Finland. So, I mean, yeah, Sam Reinhart and Sam Bennett went the distance in that one. And Matthew Tkachuk's injury got worse after the first Canada-US game and even into the final between the two teams. Yes, that was kind of a blessing in disguise once again for the Panthers when it came to the LTIR space, the conversations between Brad Marchand and Sam Bennett, and to see those two get along now and them being on the same team, which they once again discuss how, hey, these are your 2 players who like to toe the line, and then you'll do anything of what it takes to win. But you think about different gaps. I spoke about Sergei Bobrovsky and the back-to-backs, but also that whole 14-day gap between the last regular season game before 4 Nations and the first game out of the 4 Nations tournament. And also Aaron Ekblad, this is the guy who's logged a lot of miles and has had the most injuries for the Panthers, especially in the beginning of 2021 when he went out with that fractured leg, and then even in the 2022 postseason where he missed the last few months of the season. But this time, from February 8th to February 22nd, from the start, 14 days, and then from his suspension to March 8th until his first playoff game, 49 days. So those 49 days in between that for Aaron Ekblad has been such a luxury. And yeah, we could talk about those suspensions and the suspension in the playoffs for that hit on Brandon Hagel, but it's a luxury that the Panthers have been able to get things done early. So it hasn't mattered whether it's been rest or no rest when it came to going from the Toronto series into Carolina. And both teams are going to get a whole bunch of rest right before the Stanley Cup final. So that's going to be a narrative that's going to be bucked for this postseason. And again, thankfully to Brad Marchand, Game 3 against the Toronto Maple Leafs in that overtime winner, we're looking at at that point as the turning point of the entire Stanley Cup playoffs. The Brad Marchand doesn't score that overtime winner, we might not even be talking about the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup final as well. But let's go over the Stanley Cup final schedule of when it's going to start and every game, and what I would have done different if I were the one choosing the schedule for the Stanley Cup final. So Game 1 is Wednesday, June 4th. Game 2 is Friday, June 6th. Game 3 is June 9th. 2-day gap in between. And then Game 4 is Thursday, June 12th. Game 5 is Saturday, June 14th. A 1-day gap in between the travel day from Game 4 to Game 5. Game 6 is back in Sunrise on June 17th on the Tuesday. And then a Game 6 will be Friday, June 20th. So also that means if there's a Stanley Cup victory for the Florida Panthers, there won't be as much time to squeeze in a parade, celebrations, draft, awards, and then only for it less than a week later for them to be broken up in free agency. Let's not forget the very iconic day, the most memorable day in the history of the franchise, June 24th, 2024. That was a Monday. Free agency was 6 days later, and you had awards. You couldn't do a parade in between, and then 1 day before the parade, 1 day after the parade was free agency. So there's a little bit of breathing room, and thankfully, honestly, yeah, there might be conversation of rest versus rust, and if the Dallas Stars would have won last night, Game 1 would have actually started on Saturday, June 7th. And honestly, I wanted to get this Stanley Cup final started, and honestly, selfishly, to not have a week's worth of previews, because you just want the games to start and get it going already for both of these teams who are just so hungry to get this, to win the Stanley Cup and to just get out there, because these are creatures of habits. They want to get on the ice and they want to get into the game speed. So the one issue I do have with this schedule is the fact that there's a 1-day gap in between games 4 and 5. And it's a little bit of an odd for it to be on the travel day when there's a 2-day gap in between games 3 and 4 when the series shifts to Sunrise. But I would have done one thing a little different. And I tried, and I looked at the Stanley Cup final schedule and I compared it to the NBA Finals schedule, which is already out and to the fact that there is to the point where there would be no conflicts in between the two leagues, and people who don't really watch hockey can get their sports fix and still watch the Stanley Cup Final without it interfering with the NBA Finals as well. So what I would have done differently to get the travel, to still have the 2-day gap in between the travel days, which I would have done game 2 to have the 2-day gap when the series is in Edmonton. So game 1 would be still be on June 4th. Game 2 would have been on the Saturday, June 7th. 2-day gap, shift to sunrise, June 10th, June 12th for games 3 and 4. 2-day gap, game 5 would be June 15th, game 6, June 18th. And then possible game 7 would have been on that Saturday, June 21st. And you could look at the NBA schedule. You could look at that schedule that I laid out for you guys, and there's no conflicts in between that. And you could still have that travel day between for the two teams. Obviously, the Panthers and the Oilers fly direct, and unfortunately, the media members who are traveling to and from, there's no direct flights for them to get from South Florida to Edmonton. And we heard so many of the horror stories about the reporters going from city to city. Even the story of Jordan McPherson having to go from, I believe it was Toronto to London, to fly to Calgary and then take an Uber from Calgary all the way to Edmonton in order to make it to warmups for one of the games. So the last thing fans want to hear is media people complaining about travel, but it is a factor in how we get information out to you guys. So that's what the difference that I would make if I were to make the actual schedule for this Stanley Cup Final. But it's going to be a fun one. It's going to be a thriller, and I'm very excited to see. It's crazy because you think of you don't really think of rivalries when it comes to Western Conference versus Eastern Conference. I mean, you could argue that there is a big one still, maybe with the Chicago Blackhawks and the Detroit Red Wings, even though they haven't been at the peak of their powers recently. But the fact that they both used to be in the same conference, there's a historic rivalry there. But the fact that we're getting back-to-back finals between the Panthers and the Oilers, I mean, it's maybe something a little bit of a rivalry brewing between the two. So that is I'm excited, the fact that it is an actual rematch between the two teams. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we are going to discuss Matthew Tkachuk discussing how the fresh blood on the Florida Panthers helps keep the group going, and how Paul Maurice, he might have changed the culture when it comes to the handshake line. We're going to discuss that more next year on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Third and final segment here on this Friday, May 30th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And congrats to the Charlotte Checkers for taking a 2-0 series lead over the Laval Rocket, winning both of their road games in Laval, just like the Florida Panthers. They win on the road and they score in bunches. And John Leonard, second straight game with a shorthanded goal. So the series shifts to the Queen City, and game 3 of the Calder Cup Eastern Conference Final in the Calder Cup playoffs is Sunday, June 1st. You could catch all those games on Flow Hockey. So Matthew Tkachuk spoke about how fresh blood has helped keep the Panthers going, and also it's so rejuvenating, and still the energy that it brings to a squad when you yourself have won, and then you have new players coming into the mix who want a little bit of a piece of that. Nate Schmidt has been to a Stanley Cup Final before. Unfortunately, he lost in that final when he was with the Vegas Golden Knights against the Washington Capitals. It's crazy because he was one of the players from the Washington Capitals on the expansion draft, and he faces off against the team that let him go, that did not protect them in the draft. So you want to play a lot for those guys. I mean, even backup goaltender Vitek Vanacek, who's a late addition to the mix for the Florida Panthers here, you still want to win it for those guys. A complete fourth line for the Panthers. And even though Jonah Gadjevich was on last year's team, he didn't play a single playoff game, has a couple of goals in the entire run, and also being a big contributor in just a big bruising, forechecking kind of style that the Florida Panthers bring. A new winger on Anton Lundell's line. I mean, we've seen it 3 different years. Anton Lundell having a different winger, Sam Reinhart, Vladimir Tarasenko, and now Brad Marchand to the mix. I know Vlad had a Stanley Cup before 2024, and Brad Marchand has also had his Stanley Cup in only his first season in the NHL back in 2011 with the Boston Bruins. But you think about wanting to get it for those guys who haven't won or have gone a long time without winning one. I mean, Seth Jones has been out of the playoffs for multiple years now after the trade from Columbus to Chicago. It's more fresh blood that the Panthers have on this mix. And let's not forget that the Panthers really had to reset things and had more questions. We were going into this season, okay, the Panthers are going to have a new quarterback on the power play. Adam Boquist was the guy running the power play for the Florida Panthers in game 1 of the regular season. And he was claimed off of waivers by the New York Islanders. I mean, that was the only strength that Adam Boquist was able to bring to the table. And unfortunately, a puck hit to the face in the first game of the season, kind of lost his spot there. There were even times where in the season where Uvis Balinskis was the guy running the power play for the Panthers. And also the versatility that Uvis Balinskis brought in the regular season, taking the power play spot, playing on the fourth line even. It was on that line, the forward line, when Mackie Samoskevich scored his first NHL goal. So the buy-in, it's another one of those examples of just buy-in when it comes to this Florida Panthers team. And then a luxury in using their LTIR space to bring in Seth Jones, fit him under the cap, and still have him under the roster for multiple years until 2030, fitting in with the core. They've identified that this is going to be what they're going to run with until 2030. So we had a lot of questions when it came to Paul Maurice and chatting with Rod Brindamore when it came to the handshake line. And we were recording with David Lassiter on the post game after Game 5 against Carolina. It was an immediate recording, so we didn't really get to see all the answers of all the questions that were asked to Paul Maurice when it came to that. And Paul Maurice basically spoke about how when it comes to two teams going at war with each other, you don't want a whole bunch of assistant coaches and people in tracksuits shaking hands between one another. And also the fact that he's the coach that won the series, you put more into favor of what he wants versus what you want if you're in the case of Rod Brindamore. So he didn't necessarily like it. And also the handshake line goes by a little bit faster, and the players get to move on after that. And also, once again, the fact that they kept the celebration short and are able to move on because they have bigger fish to fry. It's once again an example of just another of a mature group that is here in South Florida for this Panthers team, and also the fact that it's another recruiting tactic. If you really think about it, the fact that it's like the spotlight is going to be on the players for that handshake line. People are watching when it comes to what Paul Maurice's messaging is to the other coaches, and also they are the ones that center ice. They're the ones chirping at each other. There's certain like unwritten rules about coaches not chirping at specific players when it comes to that. And also the fact that players are looking at this and say, I want to play for him. Because let's be honest, the Panthers come this summer are going to be squeezed when it comes to the cap. They're not going to be able to sign everybody. They're going to be a whole bunch of cap space created for teams that are going to try to get to the point that the Florida Panthers are in, while the Panthers are just having to try to manage and get guys in under a cap, which they've already paid a whole bunch of other guys. And one of Sam Bennett and Aaron Ekblad are going to be out of the mix in this upcoming summer. And honestly, the fact that teams like a Carolina are going to get a whole bunch of space, and even other teams that Toronto's likely going to get rid of Mitch Marner, there are no excuses now for other teams with this big of a jump in the next 2 years for them to at least not be competitive and at least give the Florida Panthers a big run for their money when it comes to that. So this whole no state income tax excuse, I don't want to hear it. And you're running out of excuse. You're going to be running out of excuses come next year. That's all. That's my messaging when it comes to that. Remember, everyone could have claimed Gustav Forsling, and Carter Verhaeghe's first contract with the Panthers was at $1 million AAV when a whole bunch of other teams could have had a chance to sign him there. And hey, the Panthers get in on signings way in advance. Gustav Forsling, Jonah Gadjevich, even Carter Hagee on his second contract. So don't hate the player, hate the game. And the whole, it has to do more with your local politics than it does with the NHL. And multiple sports leagues have a salary cap as well in the NFL and the NBA. And the Miami Dolphins haven't won a playoff game since the early 2000s. Where's the argument about no state income tax when it comes to them? So miss me with that. So the Edmonton Oilers touched the Clarence S. Campbell Trophy this year. They didn't touch it last year, and then they ended up losing in the Stanley Cup Final. Panthers didn't touch the Prince of Wales Trophy 2 years ago. And they lost. They didn't touch it last year. They ended up winning. They didn't touch it this year. So something's got to give when it comes to the fact that Edmonton touched theirs and then the Panthers did not. So for what it's worth, the Tampa Bay Lightning touched it all 3 years. In their 3 consecutive Stanley Cup Finals, they went 2-1. So for what that's worth. So I guess that's a little bit of a storyline when it comes to the superstitions, when it comes to hockey fans and hockey players, when it comes to, if you do this, this is going to result in this for the Panthers. And once again, it's an incredible time to be a hockey fan because you're having the storyline of a Canadian-based team still having a chance to win the Stanley Cup, this is now the 4th time since the salary cap has been a thing that a Canadian-based team has a chance to win the Stanley Cup. So all the previous 4 times they haven't been able to get it done, and they want to make the state income tax story a thing. So this is their chance to do it. And the Panthers, they've used it to their advantage. And once again, don't hate the player, hate the game. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. We will be back with you guys on Monday to continue to preview the Stanley Cup Final in a rematch between the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers in what we are expecting to be a series for the ages, just like last year. But in the meantime, if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone and Stu Roden, Locked On NHL Prospects, and Locked On NHL Game Night. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez, signing off. And you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day.